So Cody, the recall group claims that you failed to recuse yourself from voting on an issue before the town board of trustees on which you had a clear conflict of interest. One, do you think you had a conflict of interest, and why didn't you recuse yourself from voting on the code amendment that allowed for the development of the Mountain Coaster to proceed?
The code amendment for the Mountain Coaster was one of three, and at the time the topic was about Bond Park, and they needed this code amendment because I'm against regulations that are unenforceable, and there was commercial activities taking place in Bond Park, and this was a way to change that. Now, at the time of that vote, I didn't have permission on my property from the owners of Yakutat Land Corporation to proceed with anything. I hadn't made any decisions. I hadn't taken any actions to proceed. It was just a single conversation that took place before that, and that is in the county. And I was elected to represent the people in the city limits of Estes Park, and my vote was for that. After the fact, even the county commissioner, Tom Donnelly, said, I, Tom, am the one that made the decision for the change in the county, so really, if they were going to recall someone, it should be him. I was in no way conflicted. I didn't have a conflict of interest. I've already voted many times to clean up our code language. My platform has been this pro-business, small government platform. It wasn't even a close vote. It didn't need my vote to pass. There were a lot of things in that amendment, and one of the biggest issues were the height restrictions. Now, that is a controversial issue in a town like this, height restrictions. And when you don't have a conflict of interest, as a board member, you have a responsibility to vote. The easy thing to do is recuse on everything, do nothing, but I'm a get it done kind of guy. And during that time period, I had no intentions of any other effects, and so I voted on the code amendment.
The recall group also says that you contributed, quote, ongoing erosion of public trust in local government. I'm wondering what your response to that is.
Well, they were referring to the citizen survey and that erosion. Mm-hmm. The 2016 data was collected in July and August of the year I was elected. So it's not even reflective of the time I was really on the board. Plus, I'm just one member of a 7-member board. And if the survey had come out that confidence had increased those 3 months, I wouldn't take responsibility for that. And therefore, I don't think I should have to take responsibility if it did indeed decrease. Plus, I wasn't specifically mentioned in any of the survey questions, so to think the entire thing hangs on the mayor pro tem that's been there, I don't even know, I wasn't even mayor pro tem at the time, I was just a trustee. I'm just a member of a 7-person board. So if that was the case, why am I the only one in the middle of this recall? And if it was about the code amendment, why did they involve the mayor?
The last claim of theirs on their petition that I want you to address, they state that you used your power on the board to, quote, bypass established procedures for approval of development projects for financial gain. I'm wondering, did anyone come forward to you since you submitted your application for the coaster telling you that they were pressured by you to approve the code amendments that you acted inappropriately?
Absolutely not. And the less facts that the other side has, the bigger the conspiracy. I certainly didn't influence the Trail-Gazette, who did an intensive investigation into every possible person involved. The board has one employee as a board, not as an individual, and that is Frank Lancaster, the CEO. Frank has even admitted publicly, or not admitted, but said publicly, there was no influence placed on him. I didn't even talk to Frank until long into the process of this application. to say that I influence the county commissioners, use my position, I don't have a position of authority with the county commissioners. Before I even I brought an associate in to talk to Randy about an idea he had at a different location on the ranch. That code amendment had already been through the regular process. It had been through the Planning Commission, it had been through community development. It's been 6 months before I'd even had any conversations with anybody, even as brief as they were. One more thing.
Yeah.
My service for the last 10 years, everything I do is above board. And my commitment has been to this community, and I have never put my interest before that of the town. And it's hurtful and it's wrong to try to create, just try to throw enough manure against the wall so something sticks. And I think this speaks more to the credibility of their recall group than it does to my credibility, especially the business license thing.
Let's take a couple steps back. I'm wondering, why do you want to build a mountain coaster in the first place?
That project, I have I'm raising 3 kids here in town of Estes Park. I've always wanted to create an environment where they never had to have a job, but they always had to work. And, there's a developer under every rock that wants to buy my 400 acres. And I could certainly sell it, give my kids $20 million and tell them to stay out of trouble. But with the coaster, and it's really a slide, it was an opportunity for the ranch to say the ranch and for rides to be given, much like my trail rides. It was a good fit for the future, not necessarily for me.
So you mentioned your conversation you had with Randy Hunt in the spring of 2017 about the coaster itself. And at the time you told Claire that you were, in quotes, still on the fence about the project. So first I'm wondering why you had this meeting in the first place, and I'm also wondering, was the coaster in the back of your mind at the time, seeing that the amendments to the development code were on the trustees' upcoming agendas?
I took, let's see here, that meeting was on behalf of an associate that was interested, and I told him that I wasn't interested. He asked if he could at least ask. We went in and he asked. After that, it was made clear that that wasn't an option for the family. I've never really was that involved with the coaster in the past, so it was never in the back of my mind again. I did check with Randy afterwards, and I said, just to make sure this doesn't have anything to do with me, and he said it did not. So at that time, I didn't really feel like I had a conflict.
So why did you proceed to have 2 more discussions about the coaster after that with Mr. Hunt?
Those discussions, I'm not sure when they took place. I can't remember. I thought there was just one. I'm not sure about the other 2. Was that a year later?
I'm not exactly sure.
I couldn't tell you the timeline on it, but we did report on that.
Uh-huh.
We had 3.
I did. I think one was before all this, and another one was a year later.
So the first meeting wasn't actually about the current project.
It was about a coaster it was about a slide in general over on the far north end of the property.
Okay, and the one you're building now is a different project.
It's a different. It's the same
still
type of
slide.
project. It's
Okay.
a slide, but in a different area.
Okay.
The one, we hadn't looked into it. We didn't know a whole lot about the project, but that particular area wasn't conducive.
Okay.
I mean, that's just how preliminary a discussion it was. I have a lot of discussions, so.
Well, in that regard, I'm wondering, did you have a timeline for the coaster in mind at the time of these discussions?
No, I didn't have a timeline. I wasn't even too sure what one was. We're talking about the first discussion. Now the other 2, I think the other 2 were way down. Well, I think the other 2 were way down the line.
Okay. I guess my big question here in this section of the conversation, I'm wondering, why did you wait 3 months to file your pre-application for the coaster after the code amendment allowing it was made?
Because I still wasn't actively pursuing the project until then.
What
made you
switch?
decide to?
Oh, I think my associate kept saying, the viability of it and the cost of it, and my family, different family members that owned the business had finally been like, let's take a look at it, and presented it, and then they agreed that they would be supportive of that with certain lease requirements and so forth.
So,
I think it was a general change in the ownership's concept of what it is.
okay.
Their reaction was a lot like mine, like, heck no, we're in the horse business,
So as you mentioned, Lancaster is the CEO of the board.
Yes.
Why didn't you meet with him? Why did you only meet with Randy? And why didn't you maybe meet with Greg White, the town attorney, to have the same conversations you were having with Mr. Hunt?
Well, I think it's bad policy governance to have a board member go talk to the CEO, and anybody that puts in an application starts with Randy. So I didn't want to I don't bypass procedures. I didn't talk to Greg White about it because he's the town attorney. He's not my attorney as a businessman. I have no reason to talk to either one of those two in the process, I wouldn't think.
So as you know, and we talked about at the rally last week, former trustee Eric Blackhurst is now in the running for your seat on the board. He's the only candidate who's turned in a packet before deadline. So, as a former two-term trustee, how do you feel about him putting his name in the hat and being the only one at that?
Well, I'm not a candidate, so I hate to, speak of another candidate. Eric's the only candidate. I'm here for a recall, no recall position, who I happen to hold the office of. I guess Eric Blackhurst came to me and said that he supported me, he was against this recall, and that he was only running as a placeholder. Whether that's true or not, I guess that's in between Eric and his maker and his actions from here forward.
Do you feel he would have gotten the appointment of the board had he not put his name in the hat? Had there been no candidates? And had you been successfully recalled? Do you think the town board would have appointed him?
I have no real way of telling that, but I would think that the answer to that one, I guess it would depend on who else applied in that process of application. I have appointed members of the school board when someone needed to be filled in, and it is kind of an extended process, and you never know which way that's going to go.
Fair enough.
I think Eric's turn on the board is over, and it would be a giant step back to have him there.
So the League of Women Voters recently invited you to attend a candidate forum with Blackhurst, and Liz Zorns, the president of the league, signed Blackhurst's candidate packet. Did you get that invitation, and do you plan on attending the forum?
Well, I think it was a little more than just signing the other packet. I know another board member signed my recall petition that I know of. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's difficult to sort out really what their intentions are. Once again, it's a candidate forum. I'm not a candidate, so if it's about the recall, then why is Eric invited? If it's about candidates, why am I invited? So I'm not really too sure. I did get an invitation to their event. I haven't answered yet because, for one, I don't think my schedule is open during that time period. And on the other hand, it's not really Eric versus Cody. So I'm not sure that the contrast and differences in a forum is really what we're after.
So I'm kind of hearing a no on attending.
I think what you're hearing is me trying to understand what this forum is. Mm-hmm. And I'm certainly always open to public discussion. And I think this interview may be in replace of anything that we need for that forum.
Sure.
Has any of the other trustees expressed their personal opinion to you about the recall, whether they're for or against it?
I guess Ken signed the recall, or not the recall, but the petition for Eric, and I think that's pretty much the only expression I've got. Okay. I think as a
they
board,
haven't expressed it to us either, so.
Hasn't either.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
We've asked them. But,
Yeah, I think it's good governance to stay out of something like this. I know on the last election, I think, anyway, the election I was there, a lot of people are like, who are you going to endorse? And I think this kind of falls on that. When you sit on a board, you are working with whoever wins or loses. So, you know, if a trustee was very supportive of me and somebody else took that spot, you know, all we want to do is be able to work together. So I think that's kind of where we're at. I have my suspicions, but, you know, I think as long as they're not on public display, and we need to continue getting town business done.
Hoping you can address this in the public record. You spoke about it last week. There's some rumors, you know, going around that you're driving different cars around town and taking some extra precautions with your livestock. Do you feel threatened personally? Do you feel your animals are threatened? And are these allegations true?
If you're asking me whether or not I take extra precautions when I drive somewhere, I do. If the question is about my livestock, I do take precautions because of some other things around town against animals that I am aware of. So,
what kind of precautions are we talking about in regards to your livestock?
You know, I'd really rather not go through it too much, but I will say that we are currently monitoring food and water sources for our livestock, and rumors about arson against my hay supply.
Okay. Do you have anything on that?
Have you been threatened personally?
I have been inferred to, but not threatened. I know it's very disappointing. You know, as far as transparency is concerned, I did a very good job on social media, keeping everybody involved in town. And when that turned against my kids, at that time I took some precautions to not identify where they are or what they're doing. And there have been some separate incidents that have tried to involve my kids in the politics of Estes Park. And you know, that's concerning for everybody. There's certain things that you accept when you decide to volunteer and serve, but I think that this has crossed the line from that. I think there's an escalating effect. There's screaming at public meetings, then there's letters to all the representatives with slander in it, and then there's anonymous postcards, and then there's pets starting to, you know, be involved, and then there's rumors and threats and that sort of angry, you know. Most major things start with profanity at the beginning, right? So I think getting screamed at meetings and harassed in the parking lot and so forth, that just leads to bigger issues.
Where do you think most of that's coming from? The recall group itself and their intentions?
It's hard for me not to think that it's not coming from them, as they have publicly stated on their website that their mission has been the recall of the mayor and myself from the very beginning. And then anytime they step off, they try to deny. But in general, that's what a bully does, right? I know you did, but what am I, right? So I think it's a pattern. Do I have any concrete evidence to such, and who? No, but I think that's by design.
Well, I kind of want to touch on that. I think it's interesting. You're labeling of them, the group, as bullies.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain why you choose that term itself?
I think that term is representative of uncivil behavior outside of the process. My process for my project and anything on the town board, I follow the protocols just like everybody else, but they are operating outside of that and trying to put pressure in ways that are unrelated. So I think that's what a bully does.
Have to stop the video and pick it back up. We are rolling again. My next question for you, do you plan on running in the general election?
I think that's a question for the general election, much like this business license issue and moratoriums and stuff. Those are general election issues, and we're having a general election as soon as this election's over. I believe it's 6 or 7 months, And just like these issues, I think my decision on running should, unfortunately, another drawback of this recall is I'm focusing on this recall election instead of the town's business. It's very distracting, so I'm not going to try to add to that distraction by thinking about the next election. But I certainly haven't ruled it out, and I think we'll see what happens here.
Do you have anything on that before final statement?
It kind of goes with the final statement.
Okay.
Why should people vote no on the recall?
I would vote no on the recall because this is really a property rights issue. I know the ballot language says that I'm taking away property rights. In reality, I've done nothing but defend it. I've voted against extending moratoriums because they take away property rights without the government actually having to draft language. You can't allow this group to protect their rights at the expense of others. My service has always been above board. I think you vote no on this recall to send the message to everybody in town that ever wants to volunteer and run for office that that's just not how we do business here in Estes Park. And by voting no, you can send a message that this toxic environment is not something that you're going to have to face when you're volunteering in Estes Park. I did offer to do this interview months ago, but the recall group refused to sit down at the table. So there's a certain amount of civility that's needed to be able to operate a town government. And I think by voting no, you're voting yes for civility.